Welcome, weary traveler. You've left the noise of the world behind and stepped into a realm untouched by time. Here, candlelight dances upon ancient stone walls, and the air carries the soft hum of forgotten lullabies. Beyond these gates, the night is gentle, and every story is a silver thread, weaving warmth around your heart. So rest your mind. Let each word be a quiet step into the halls of dreams until sleep, tender and deep, finds you. You are safe here, and the world drifts away. Chapter 1: The Hammer That Fell Quiet. At the edge of the kingdom, where the hills curved gently into valleys and the rivers murmured like old friends, there stood a village that seemed untouched by the rush of time. Cobblestone streets wound between cottages of timber and stone. Their roofs sloped low as if bowing to the weight of the sky. Lanterns glowed warmly at dusk, casting soft halos against the darkening walls, while the smell of bread and earth lingered in the air. It was a place of simple rhythms, a place where voices once carried easily, laughter spilled into the fields, and every dawn arrived with the sound of work beginning anew. But all of that had changed. The silence had come one night, slow and creeping, as though it had poured from the very soil. It stole the voices of many, not suddenly, not violently, but gently, like a thief who knows how to move without waking the household. Some woke to find their voices gone entirely. Others discovered their words weaker with each passing day. What had once been a lively village now moved through its mornings in whispers, and through its evenings in quiet gestures. Songs no longer drifted from the tavern, and the laughter of children rang hollow, cut short by the weight of quiet pressing in from the hills. It was here, in this hush, that Liam, the blacksmith, kept his forge alive. His workshop sat at the farthest edge of the village, near where the path bent toward the woods. Even from a distance, the glow of its fire could be seen at dusk, pulsing like the steady breath of a giant. Liam was a man built of broad shoulders and worn hands, his arms etched with scars from fire and steel. His hair fell heavy across his brow, streaked with soot, his eyes dark and distant, as though he stared not only at the iron before him, but at something far away and unseen. The forge had once been a place of sound, the ringing of the hammer, the hiss of steam when hot iron met water, the chatter of apprentices who worked by his side. Now it was a quieter place. The hammer still fell, but the echo seemed swallowed before it could fill the air. The silence reached even here, coiling around his work like smoke. Liam bore it without complaint, though each day the weight pressed heavier upon his chest. It was near twilight, when the sky turned violet and the lanterns in the square began to flicker, that a boy arrived at his door. His name was Noah, no older than 15, with a shock of hair that always seemed unruly and eyes that held more courage than his small frame suggested. He burst into the workshop with a breathless urgency, though even his voice trembled as if afraid to break the quiet. "Master Liam," he said, his words carrying more boldly than most dared to speak these days. "They say you can make anything. They say your hammer can bend steel like clay. They say you could make a weapon strong enough to fight silence itself." Liam set aside his hammer its handle blackened with years of use. He did not answer at once. Instead, he studied the boy, his flushed cheeks, his determined jaw, the faint tremor of fear in his voice. Finally, with a slow exhale, he said, "Silence is no enemy you can strike, Noah. It is not a beast that claws at your door, nor a soldier standing in the field. It seeps, it waits. You cannot split it in two with steel." "But we need hope," Noah said, stepping closer. "The villagers believe only you can do it. If anyone can forge a sword strong enough to cut through silence, it's you." The blacksmith's gaze shifted toward the embers of his forge, glowing faintly in the dimming light. Hope. The word felt foreign, like a relic left in dust. And yet, in the boy's eyes, he saw something he thought had long since gone from the village: belief. Before he could reply, the door opened once more. Two women entered, their cloaks trailing the cool air of evening. Olivia, tall and sharp-eyed, carried with her a satchel heavy with parchment, the smell of old ink clinging to her robes. She was a scholar who had spent years searching through forgotten texts. Beside her stood Emma, softer in presence, a healer whose hands always seemed to carry the faint scent of herbs. While Olivia's gaze was like steel, Emma's was warm, steady, and reassuring. "Liam," Olivia said, her voice low but certain, "you cannot refuse this task. Legends speak of weapons forged not from iron, but from what is absent, a blade made of silence itself. It is no myth, it is prophecy." Emma stepped forward, her hands folded as though in prayer. "If silence has taken so much from us, then perhaps it can also give. If it can be shaped, transformed, then maybe we will find not despair in it, but strength." Liam's brow furrowed. "Forge silence? Your words are madness." Olivia pulled a piece of parchment from her satchel, laying it across the anvil. Faded symbols marked the page, two crescents interlocked, and beneath them, words written in a hand older than kings. "Only the hand that hears what cannot be spoken shall shape the blade that parts silence from sound." The forge seemed to sigh as the words were read aloud, the flames flickering higher for a breath. Noah's eyes widened. "It's true, then. It must be you." The silence hung heavy. Liam stared at the parchment, then at the boy, then at the women. His jaw tightened. "If I try this," he said slowly, "then each of you must carry the weight with me. Boy, you must be my voice when silence grows too loud." Noah nodded eagerly. "I'll never stop speaking." "Scholar," he said to Olivia, "if your lore misleads me, then all of this fire will burn for nothing." Olivia met his stare, unwavering. "The texts do not lie. And healer," he said at last, turning to Emma, "if the quiet consumes me, you must bring me back." Emma's hands, soft but firm, closed gently around his scarred knuckles. "You will not face it alone." The decision was made. That night, long after the village fell into sleep, the forge burned brighter than it had in years. Liam placed something strange upon the anvil, a shard Olivia had carried in her satchel, a fragment of silence itself, sealed long ago in a vessel of glass. It shimmered like crystal, clear and sharp-edged, and yet when set upon the iron, the workshop grew so still that even the fire seemed to hold its breath. Liam struck it once with his hammer. The blow landed, the shard bent, but no sound rang out. The strike devoured itself, leaving only a deeper hush. Noah whispered encouragement to fill the void. Olivia muttered words of forgotten incantations. Emma rested her hand upon Liam's shoulder, steadying his arm. Hour after hour, the silence bent to his will. Sparks leapt like stars, yet the air remained heavy, soundless. Sweat poured down his brow, his chest heaving with effort. And slowly, impossibly, the shards stretched and formed. When the first light of dawn touched the forge, Liam lifted what his hands had wrought. It was a sword, dark as obsidian, its edge glimmering faintly silver though it reflected no light. It hummed, not with sound, but with silence so deep it pressed against the skin. Chapter 2, Echoes Beneath the Anvil. Morning in the village of Elmsworth arrived not with noise, as it once had, but with the slow unfolding of light across the rooftops. The sun crept gently over the eastern ridge, its rays spilling down like golden silk, sliding over thatched roofs, glimmering across dew-soaked meadows, and slipping into windows where families stirred to life. The silence still lingered, woven into every corner, but morning light softened it, as if reminding the people that stillness could also be a blessing. At the forge, Liam stood with the sword of silence laid carefully across the anvil. He had not slept much, though Emma's herbs had soothed his exhaustion for a time. His strong hands now rested on either side of the blade, his dark eyes fixed on it as though it might vanish if he dared to blink. The weapon was unlike anything he had ever shaped. It did not gleam as steel should. Its surface was dark as still water at midnight, yet it seemed to hold a depth that was endless, like a sky without stars. It gave off no sound, no whisper when lifted, no ring when tapped. The silence was heavy around it, and yet, oddly, Liam did not feel threatened. Instead, he felt a calm weight, as though he were holding the stillness of the world itself. The door creaked softly, and Noah entered, rubbing sleep from his eyes. His hair stuck out wildly, as though he had wrestled with dreams, and in his hand he clutched a half-eaten piece of bread. "You stayed here all night, didn't you?" Noah asked, his voice carrying a brightness that filled the forge. Liam gave a faint nod. The sword needed watching. Some creations are not meant to be left alone. Noah approached, his steps hesitant, his gaze fixed on the blade. He reached out a hand as if to touch it, then drew back quickly. "It looks alive, like it's listening." "Perhaps it is," Liam murmured. "Silence hears what sound cannot." Noah shivered, though not from fear. The hush around the sword seemed to press against him, making even his heartbeat feel louder than it should. "Will it help the village?" he asked quietly. "Will it bring our voices back?" "That remains to be seen," Liam said. His voice was steady, but in his chest there stirred a question he dared not put into words. Was it right to forge silence into steel? Was he shaping salvation, or only deepening the hush that clung to the land? The morning passed in gentle rhythm. Olivia arrived with her parchments, her hands already stained with ink, her eyes gleaming with a mix of curiosity and certainty. She moved to the table and began sketching the blade, tracing the etched symbols that shimmered faintly along its surface. Marks none of them had seen during the forging, but which now glowed softly, like frost upon stone. "These runes are older than the kingdom itself," Olivia said softly, her fingers gliding across the parchment. "They speak of balance, not silence destroying sound, nor sound overpowering silence, but a harmony between them. The blade is not a weapon in the way we imagine. It is a key." Emma came shortly after, carrying a basket of herbs tied with twine. Her presence filled the forge with the gentle fragrance of lavender and sage, mingling with the warm iron scent of the embers. She set the basket down, her eyes soft as they landed on Liam. "You've pushed yourself too far already," she said, brushing soot from his cheek with the back of her hand. "Rest, or this silence will not need to strike you. Your own body will fall before it." "I will rest," Liam said quietly, and though his lips barely formed the words, she smiled, knowing he meant it. The day unfolded slowly. The forge remained open, though few dared approach. Villagers passed by, their eyes catching glimpses of the strange, dark blade resting upon the anvil. They said little, but their steps lingered, their faces lifted with something unspoken, hope. For the first time in many weeks, there was a stir in the village that was not fear or despair. Something had been made, and though it was strange, it was theirs. As evening came, the group gathered again. Noah perched on a stool, fidgeting with a scrap of iron. Olivia leaned over her scrolls, tracing her notes with the point of a quill. Emma sat near the hearth, steeping herbs in a small pot of water, the steam curling like ghostly ribbons in the quiet air. Liam finally lifted the sword, the weight of it steady in his grasp. He held it not as a warrior raising a weapon, but as a craftsman testing the strength of his creation. The hush deepened, wrapping them all in stillness. Then, for the first time, Liam swung the blade. It did not whistle through the air. It did not hum or strike with force. Instead, as it cut downward, the silence shifted, folding away like fabric pulled gently aside. For a single moment, they heard something none of them had expected. The faint echo of voices, laughter, bells ringing in the distance. Then, just as quickly, the sound was gone, replaced by the familiar hush. The four of them sat in stunned quiet. Noah's eyes were wide as stars. "Did you hear that? It was the village before." Olivia's hand trembled as she clutched her quill. "It reveals what has been lost. This sword is more than steel. It holds memory." Emma pressed her hand over her heart, her eyes misted with unshed tears. "It's a piece of the world, held safe, waiting to be returned." Liam lowered the blade, his expression unreadable. "It means the silence is not complete. What was taken still lingers, waiting. If this sword is truly a key, then perhaps it can open what was closed." The firelight flickered across their faces, softening the sharp edges of their doubt. In the hush of the forge, they felt not fear but a strange comfort. The sword was not an end, it was a beginning. That night, as lanterns lit across the village and shadows deepened against stone, Liam placed the sword carefully in its stand. The silence pulsed around it, not as an enemy, but as something alive, something waiting to be understood. The forge grew dim, the fire settling into embers, the group resting in the warm glow. Outside, crickets chirped, the brook whispered faintly, and stars unveiled themselves one by one. And in the heart of that quiet place, for the first time in many weeks, they felt a calm that was deeper than fear, a calm that promised tomorrow would carry more than silence. Chapter 3, The Song Beneath the Stillness. The silence of Elmsworth had become something the villagers wore, like a cloak too heavy to shed. It draped across every doorstep, every field, every winding path between the cottages. Yet since the forging of the strange sword, a subtle change had passed among the people. They walked with lighter steps. They lingered at windows longer, glancing toward the forge as though some invisible hearth burned there, warming more than iron. Liam noticed it too. In the days that followed, he worked as he always had, hammering at the anvil, shaping plows and hinges, mending the wheels of carts. But behind every task, he felt the presence of the sword resting in its stand, dark and soundless, yet full of promise. His arms moved with habit, but his mind drifted often to that single moment, the moment when the blade had cut the air and the forgotten voices of the village had risen like echoes from a dream. Olivia visited daily, her scrolls multiplying, her notes growing more tangled as she attempted to decipher the shifting runes that traced themselves upon the sword's surface. They glowed faintly at times, as though stirred by unseen winds, then faded to nothing. She believed the runes were not fixed but alive, changing in response to what surrounded them. "It is as if the sword listens," she said one morning, her voice hushed as she dipped her quill. "Not only to us, but to the world itself. The silence, the wind, the earth beneath our feet. All these things are written into its shape." Emma, ever gentle and steady, watched Olivia with quiet admiration but also a touch of concern. She would brew her herbs by the forge, ensuring Liam drank what she brought, ensuring Noah did not spend too many hours tinkering with scraps of metal and bolts, ensuring that someone kept their feet upon the earth. She believed the sword had meaning, yes, but she believed more in the people holding it. "Do not lose yourselves to it," she reminded them softly one evening, her hands folded over her basket. "A blade, however strange, cannot bear the weight of your hearts. Remember, you are flesh and spirit, not only dreamers chasing steel." Noah, of course, found little room for caution. He grew restless in the hush, eager to test what the sword could do, eager to see if the voices hidden within could be coaxed into staying. He begged Liam more than once to swing it again, to draw forth the buried sounds of the village. But Liam shook his head. "It is not a tool for curiosity," he said each time, "nor a toy for wonder. It carries something we do not yet understand." And so the days moved like rivers, slow, unbroken, each carrying whispers of change. One night, When the moon rode high and silver above the ridges, Liam sat alone at the forge. The fire glowed low, coals burning steady and red, their warmth seeping into the stone floor. The sword rested in its place, its surface catching the moonlight through the open shutters, gleaming not with brightness but with depth, as though it swallowed the light whole. He rose, stepping closer, his rough hands reaching for the hilt. The silence thickened as he lifted it, heavy but steady in his grasp. He stood still, breathing slowly, listening not with his ears but with his heart. And there, faint, so faint he heard something, a sound not outside, but within the blade itself. It was not the echo of voices this time, but something gentler, softer, a song, low and wordless, as if sung by the earth itself when it first learned to breathe. The melody stirred him deeply. It was not joyous, not mournful, but timeless. He lowered the sword, but the song lingered in his chest, a quiet vibration he could not shake. The next morning he told Olivia, Emma, and Noah what he had heard. A song, Noah asked, eyes wide. What kind of song? No kind I can name, Liam answered. It was not made by voice or by hand. It was older, deeper, as though silence itself wished to speak. Olivia nearly trembled with excitement. Then the sword does not only reveal what was lost, it remembers, carries more than our village's voices, carries the memory of all things, perhaps even the first silence, before the first sound was ever made. Emma, though touched by Liam's words, frowned slightly. And what would it mean for silence to sing? What does it ask of us? The question hung in the air, unanswered. Later that evening, they decided together to test the blade once more. Not recklessly, but with care. In the field just beyond the forge, beneath the open sky, Liam raised the sword. The village gathered at a distance, watching in hushed anticipation. Children clutched their mothers' skirts. Elders leaned on canes, all eyes fixed upon the blacksmith. Liam swung. Again, no whistle of steel. Again, the air folded, the silence shifted. And this time, what rose was not only laughter or bells, but music. Faint, fragile, yet unmistakable. A harp string, a lute's note, voices in harmony. The villagers gasped, their eyes shining with tears. Some pressed their hands to their mouths, as though afraid the sound would shatter if breathed upon too harshly. The music lasted longer this time, swelling like a tide, filling the field with lightness. For a few heartbeats, the silence was not absence but canvas, and upon it danced the colors of a song once forgotten. Then it faded, slipping back into stillness. The hush returned, but it felt lighter, gentler, less cruel. The villagers murmured softly, some weeping, some smiling. Though the silence had not broken, it no longer felt like a curse, felt patient. That night, the four gathered once more in the forge, their hearts restless with wonder. The blade is teaching us, Olivia said, her ink-stained fingers trembling over her parchment. Piece by piece, it shows us what silence holds. It is not emptiness. It is memory, song, life itself. Emma laid a hand upon the sword's hilt, her touch gentle as a prayer. If it is teaching, then we must learn carefully. Not all songs are meant to be sung too soon. Noah leaned forward eagerly. Then what comes next? What else can it show us? Voices, music. What lies deeper still? Liam sat in quiet thought, his gaze fixed upon the embers glowing in the forge. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, low. Perhaps, he said, what lies deeper than song is truth, and that is what silence has been keeping from us all along. The words settled over them like a veil. Outside, the moon drifted higher, and the hush of Elmsworth seemed almost to breathe, as though listening. In that moment, each of them knew the sword was not merely forged of silence. It was silence shaped into something that could be held. A gift, a mystery, and perhaps one day a reckoning. Chapter 4 Whispers Along the River. The village of Elmsworth had always lived close to the river. It wound like a silver ribbon through the meadows, slow and gentle, its waters reflecting the skies above as faithfully as a mirror. The silence had touched the river too. No splash of fish, no rustle of reeds, no laughter of children tumbling stones into the current. Yet since the forging of the strange blade, there had been a subtle shift. The villagers began to wander toward the riverbanks again, as though remembering an old friend. On a quiet morning, Liam, Olivia, Noah, and Emma walked together along the worn path that led to the water. The air was soft, washed with the pale gold of dawn. Dew clung to every blade of grass, catching light like tiny stars scattered across the earth. The silence pressed gently around them, yet for the first time in many seasons, it no longer felt so heavy. Liam carried the sword at his side, wrapped in a simple cloth. He did not display it openly, for the villagers had begun to speak of it in hushed tones. A sacred thing, a keeper of memory. Some had even begun leaving offerings outside the forge. Flowers, bread, carved tokens of wood, as though the blade itself were a guardian spirit. Liam, ever humble, accepted their gestures quietly, unsure of how to feel beneath their reverence. As they neared the riverbank, Olivia's eyes brightened. She had brought a scroll tucked beneath her arm, its parchment filled with shifting marks she had copied from the blade. She believed the river might awaken something new within the sword, for water, she reasoned, was as old a keeper of memory as silence itself. Emma knelt near the edge, her fingers brushing the damp grass. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply, as though listening to something the others could not hear. Noah skipped ahead, crouching at the bank and tossing a pebble into the current. The stone vanished without a sound, the ripples spreading silently across the glassy surface. He frowned. "It feels wrong," he whispered, "to see the water move and hear nothing." Emma opened her eyes slowly. "Perhaps not wrong," she said softly. "Perhaps only unfinished, like a story waiting for its next line." They gathered close as Liam unwrapped the sword. Its dark steel caught the pale light, gleaming faintly as though the river's reflection seeped into it. He lifted it carefully, the weight settling into his palms like an old truth. For a long moment, he did not move. He simply stood, breathing in the river's quiet presence, the smell of wet earth, the faint fragrance of wild mint growing along the bank. The silence pressed close, but this time it did not suffocate. It invited. Then Liam raised the sword. He swung it slowly, not with force, but with care, as though he were parting a curtain. The air trembled, and from the river rose whispers, soft, faint, endless whispers, like countless voices speaking beneath the water's skin. The villagers who had followed at a distance gasped, their eyes widening as they leaned closer. The whispers were not loud, but they filled the silence like threads woven into a tapestry. Noah knelt at the edge, his hands hovering above the current. "It's as if the river is remembering," he breathed. Olivia scribbled furiously upon her scroll, though her hands shook. "Not voices of the villagers," she murmured. Older than us. Older than Elmsworth itself." Emma closed her eyes again, her lips moving without sound. She pressed her hand over her heart, as though steadying it against the tide of unseen words. When she opened her eyes, they shone softly, reflecting the pale river light. "It is not only remembering," she said. "It is teaching us. The water holds every moment it has ever touched. Rain, tears, streams, oceans. Carries them all." The whispers lingered for a time, curling in and out like mist over the water. Then, slowly, they faded, leaving only the hush of silence once more. Yet the silence no longer seemed empty. It felt layered, as though holding countless stories, countless lives. The villagers stood motionless for a time, hearts lifted and unsettled all at once. Then, one by one, they bowed their heads and drifted back toward their cottages, leaving the four companions alone by the river. Noah exhaled, his breath sharp in the hush. "We must try again. There must be more. If the river remembers, then perhaps the forest does, or the stones, or even the stars." Olivia's eyes were alight, though shadowed by worry. "Yes, but each time the blade reveals something, it costs us a piece of our peace. We must be patient, Noah. The sword cannot be rushed." Emma laid a hand on the hilt, gently lowering it back into Liam's grasp. "Patience, yes, and care. A river can flood if too much is asked of it at once. So can silence." Liam nodded slowly. He felt the weight of their words and the weight of the blade, as though both pressed equally upon his spirit. He wrapped the sword once more, hiding its strange gleam from the world. Yet the whispers of the river remained in his heart, flowing softly, carrying him deeper into thought. That evening, as dusk stretched across Elmsworth, the four sat together by the forge fire. The villagers outside lingered in the quiet glow of lanterns, whispering stories of what they had heard. Children drew pictures in the dirt of rippling waves, while elders hummed tunelessly, as if testing whether music might one day return in full. Olivia leaned close to the firelight, her scroll spread across her lap. The runes she had copied seemed to shimmer faintly, shifting like reflections in water. "Do you see?" she whispered, showing them. "They have changed again. The river's memory has etched itself into the blade's language. It is alive, as I feared and hoped." Noah grinned, his restless spirit barely contained. Alive, yes, then perhaps one day it will speak to us directly. Perhaps it will sing. Emma shook her head, though not unkindly. Or perhaps it will remain silent, and that will be its song. Liam said nothing. He stared into the fire, the flames crackling soundlessly, their light dancing across the sword's wrappings. In his heart, he heard the faintest echo of the whispers still flowing within him. They were not frightening, not sorrowful. They were steady, unending, like the current of the river itself. And he wondered, if silence carried so many voices, so many songs, so many truths, then what place was left for his own? The fire glowed on. The silence held them. And above the village, the stars began to appear, one by one, as though listening. Chapter 5: The Silent Heart of the Forest. The forest of Elmsworth had always stood like a guardian at the village's edge. Its trees rose tall and solemn, their trunks weathered by countless seasons, their branches reaching toward the skies like outstretched arms. Yet since the silence had descended upon the land, the forest had become something more, not frightening but watchful. Its quiet was not emptiness but presence, as though every leaf and root was listening. On a morning when the mist clung low to the ground and the dew shimmered faintly, Liam, Olivia, Noah, and Emma set out from the forge. The villagers had begun to whisper that if the river could remember, then surely the forest, older still, must hold deeper secrets. Liam carried the sword once more, wrapped in cloth, and though he bore it humbly, its weight pressed upon him with an almost living insistence. The path into the woods was softened by moss, each step cushioned, each sound swallowed. Birds perched in the branches above, their wings still, their throats silent. No wind moved the canopy, yet the air felt alive, as though breathing around them. Emma walked at the front, her hand brushing the bark of the nearest trees. She closed her eyes often, tilting her head as though leaning into a sound too faint for the others to catch. Olivia followed with careful steps, her scroll tucked under her arm, her eyes sharp and curious. Noah strode a little ahead, restless as always, his boots crunching lightly on the undergrowth. Liam kept to the middle, steady, the blade hidden against his side. For a time, they walked without speaking. The silence was not oppressive but thick, like mist around their thoughts, pressed gently, inviting them to slow, to listen, to breathe. At last, they reached a clearing deep within the forest. Here, the trees formed a ring around a hollow of soft grass, their trunks ancient, their roots thick and gnarled like the veins of the earth itself. Sunlight streamed through the canopy, pale and golden, falling in shafts that lit the space like a sacred hall. Emma stopped at the center, her eyes wide. "Here," she whispered. "This is the heart. I can feel it." Olivia unrolled her scroll, the runes etched upon it shimmering faintly in the sunlight. The river spoke in whispers, she murmured. Perhaps the forest will speak in breath. Liam hesitated, then unwrapped the sword. The blade gleamed darkly, the sunlight bending strangely along its edge, as though the steel drank the light rather than reflected it. He held it upright, the hilt steady in his grasp, the tip brushing the air above the earth. Nothing moved. For a long, suspended moment, the four of them simply stood. The forest seemed to hold its breath with them, each tree leaning inward, each shadow deepening. Then, slowly, the air began to stir. It was not wind. It was softer than that, more like the gentle exhale of the earth itself. The grass bent slightly, the leaves quivered, the shafts of sunlight shifted, and through it came a sound, faint but steady. Not words, not whispers, but a single endless breath. Olivia's eyes widened. She pressed her palm to her chest. "It's alive," she said, her voice trembling. The forest breathes. Noah took a step forward, his restless energy hushed by wonder. "And it remembers, doesn't it? Like the river." Emma knelt upon the grass, her hands pressed to the soil. She closed her eyes, breathing in time with the forest's exhale. "Yes," she murmured, "but it remembers differently. Not in whispers, in rhythm, in life." Liam felt it too. The sword grew heavier in his grasp, not with burden but with resonance, as though aligning itself with the forest's breath. He lowered the blade slightly, letting it point toward the ground, and the exhale deepened, spreading through the clearing like a tide of calm. The villagers, who had followed from a distance, gathered at the edges of the clearing. They did not dare step inside, but they bowed their heads, their hands clasped. For many of them, the forest had always been a place of caution, but now they looked upon it as though it were a temple. The breath of the forest lingered, weaving through the air, filling lungs and hearts alike. Then, as gently as it had come, it faded. The leaves stilled, the grass rose, and the silence settled once more, steady and complete. Yet nothing felt the same. The silence no longer seemed empty. It was full of breath, of rhythm, of the ancient patience of the trees. The villagers drifted back toward their homes, whispering prayers of thanks. Olivia traced the runes again upon her scroll, and they shifted once more, a new pattern forming like roots stretching across the parchment. Noah lay back in the grass, his eyes following the shafts of sunlight as they shifted slowly with the day. Emma kept her hands upon the soil, eyes closed, her breath still rising and falling with the memory of the forest's exhale. And Liam, standing with the sword in hand, wondered again. If silence could hold whispers and breath, what else might it carry? And what role was he to play in awakening it? That night, when they returned to the forge, the village was quieter than usual. Not from fear, nor from grief, but from reverence. Children tiptoed softly, as though not to disturb the silence. Elders sat outside their cottages, eyes lifted toward the trees at the village's edge. Inside, the fire glowed steadily, its crackle muted but warm. The four companions sat together in its light. Olivia spoke little, her eyes lost in the patterns of the scroll. Noah turned a pebble in his fingers, restless yet subdued. Emma hummed softly under her breath, not a tune, but a steady rhythm, the rhythm of the forest's exhale. And Liam, the sword across his knees, closed his eyes. In the quiet, he could still feel the forest's breath within him, steady and endless, as though it had become part of his own. The silence was no longer just silence. It was memory, it was rhythm, it was life, and it was only beginning to awaken. Chapter 6: The Echoes of the Mountains. The days after the forest's breath lingered in Elmsworth like a tender memory. Children still played by the stream, villagers still tended their hearths. Yet all of them carried the hush differently now, more reverently, more gently. The silence was no longer feared, nor pitied. It was respected, as if it had been revealed to them as something living. But for Liam, Noah, Olivia, and Emma, the silence was no longer merely a presence to be endured. It had become a companion, whispering by rivers, breathing in forests. And though their hearts had grown calmer, there was still a sense of incompleteness, like a melody paused in its middle. It was Olivia who first spoke of the mountains. She stood one evening outside the forge, parchment in hand, her eyes tracing the far horizon where jagged peaks rose like patient watchers of the valley. Their tips were capped in silver snow, their slopes bathed in the soft blues of twilight. "The silence lingers there too," she said, her voice hushed. "If rivers remember and forests breathe, then the mountains must echo. They've stood longer than all of us, longer than kingdoms, longer than memory." Emma nodded gently, her shawl wrapped about her shoulders. "The mountains hold the sky," she murmured. "If they speak, they will speak in echoes that never end." Noah grinned faintly, restless even in stillness. "Then we should hear it," he said, tossing the pebble he had kept since the forest between his hands. "If we're to learn what silence truly is, why not climb to where it touches the clouds?" Liam listened quietly, the wrapped sword resting against the forge wall. He felt the pull of the idea, not like command, but like invitation. Calm path waiting to be walked. And so, without urgency, without resistance, he nodded. "We'll go when the sun rises." The journey began at dawn. Mist lay thick in the valley, the fields silvered with dew, the cottages still wrapped in sleep. The villagers gathered quietly to see them off, not with fanfare, but with blessings spoken in low voices. Hands touched shoulders, eyes lingered with trust. And then the four companions stepped beyond the edge of Elmsworth and onto the mountain path. The air grew thinner as they walked. Pines lined the lower slopes, their needles whispering faintly, though no wind stirred them. Higher still, the trees thinned to patches, and the ground became rocky, scattered with lichens and wildflowers that bloomed in solitude. Above them, the peaks rose endlessly, their crowns veiled in drifting clouds. For hours, they walked in steady silence. Their footsteps crunched softly against stone. Their breaths rose in rhythm. Noah's stride was quick, eager, but even he slowed as the air grew sparse and cool. Olivia paused often to note the landscape, sketching runes in her scroll that seemed to stretch higher and higher, as though following the mountain's climb. Emma moved steadily, her hand trailing lightly over stones, her touch gentle, as if greeting old friends. Liam carried the sword upon his back. Wrapped still, it pressed against him with a weight that was no burden. It seemed patient, waiting, as though it too knew the mountain's call. By afternoon, they reached a plateau. The valley stretched far below them, the river glinting like a ribbon of glass, the forest spreading in endless green. Villages dotted the fields, their cottages no more than specks of light against the earth. Above, the sky widened, the clouds drifting slow and solemn. Here they rested. Emma brewed tea from herbs she had carried, the steam curling into the cool air. Noah skipped stones against a frozen pond, the clatter echoing faintly. Olivia traced runes against the rock, her strokes sharp, deliberate. Liam sat apart, gazing upward at the peaks still beyond reach. When the sun dipped lower, they climbed again. At last, near dusk, they reached the hollow of a vast mountain wall. The cliffs rose sheer, their stones streaked with age, their ridges carved by time. The hollow formed a natural amphitheater, curved and wide, as though meant to hold voices. They stepped into its center. First, there was only quiet, the kind of quiet that held its breath, neither heavy nor light. Liam unsheathed the sword, holding it upright. Its dark steel caught the fading light, bending it as though swallowing dusk. Noah, restless, cupped his hands to his mouth and called into the cliffs. His voice carried upward, then returned, faint, softened, but still his own. He laughed gently. An echo. Emma smiled faintly. Listen again. This time, when Noah's voice echoed back, it was not the same. It came layered, slowed, stretched into tones deeper than his own, as though the mountain had held his sound and reshaped it into something older. Olivia's eyes widened. She touched the rock with her palm. The mountain does not give back what it takes, she whispered. It changes it. Echoes are memory, carried forward, softened by time. Liam closed his eyes, lifting the sword higher. For a moment, he did not move. Then, with steady breath, he lowered the blade, letting its tip touch the stone floor. The sound was small, the faintest ring of steel against rock. But when it echoed, it grew. The ring spread outward, bouncing against cliff and wall, rolling back into the hollow deeper, longer, transformed. It became not a single tone, but many, layered endlessly, as if the mountain itself had begun to sing. The four companions stood in stillness, their breaths caught. The villagers at the plateau below lifted their heads, hearing the faint reverberations. The sound was not sharp, not loud, but vast. A song woven from silence itself, echoing not just once but endlessly, fading only to return again. Emma closed her eyes, her hands folded at her chest. It is the silence of endurance, she whispered. The silence that waits, that remembers, that carries. Olivia's scroll glowed faintly, runes stretching into spirals that spun like echoes across the parchment. Noah's usual grin softened, his restless energy stilled into awe. Liam, the sword still touching stone, felt the hum travel into his arms, his chest, his very breath. And when the echo at last grew faint, fading into the mountain's heart, The silence that followed was complete. Not empty, but vast, infinite. They descended slowly at nightfall. The moon rose silver above the peaks, the stars scattering across the wide sky. The silence of the mountain followed them, not heavy, but steady. Every footstep, every breath, felt carried in echo, as though they themselves had become part of the song. By the time they reached the village, the air was cool and still. The people gathered quietly to hear what had been learned, and Liam, laying the sword upon the hearthstone, spoke softly. The silence of the mountain is the silence of memory, echoes that wait, that return, that endure. The villagers nodded, eyes wide with reverence. They did not cheer nor cry out. They only sat quietly, letting the words echo within themselves, carried forward, softened by time. The silence deepened, and once more it was no longer absence. It was song. Chapter 7, The Whispering Grove. The night before had been soft and kind, the sort of night where the stars lingered longer, and even the moon seemed reluctant to leave her throne. Liam awoke to the quiet comfort of the forge, the familiar scent of ash and iron wrapping him like an old friend. He stirred the embers gently, feeding them with small pieces of wood until their glow strengthened, a patient heart beating in the quiet morning. Noah arrived soon after, carrying with him a basket of freshly picked herbs wrapped in linen. "For the oils," he explained softly, setting them down on the wooden bench. His voice was low, almost reverent, as though he didn't wish to disturb the calm of the forge. Liam smiled, grateful for his friend's constant thoughtfulness. The two worked side by side in silence, their movements unhurried, flowing as though time itself had slowed to match their rhythm. The day stretched before them without urgency. Olivia and Emma arrived later, bringing with them bread baked with rosemary and honey, its fragrance filling the air with warmth. They shared their meal slowly, each bite softened by laughter and gentle conversation. It was the kind of gathering where words were not needed as much as presence itself, the kind of companionship that filled the silence without breaking it. After their meal, Olivia suggested they walk beyond the forge, deeper into the woods, where the trees grew older and taller, their trunks wrapped in moss like emerald velvet. "There's a place I want to show you," she said, her voice carrying a secret sweetness. Emma clasped her hand eagerly, her bright eyes full of wonder. Liam and Noah exchanged a glance, then followed, each step light upon the earth. The path wound through thickets of ferns and over roots that coiled like sleeping serpents. The forest greeted them with 1,000 whispers, the rustle of leaves high above, the distant call of a dove, the faint sigh of wind moving between branches. Liam felt the weight of the world ease from his shoulders as they walked. Every step forward felt like a step into a deeper calm, as though the woods themselves were guiding them toward rest. They came at last to a grove unlike any other. The trees bent inward to form a quiet circle, their branches laced together overhead, creating a canopy where sunlight dripped through like liquid gold. In the center of the grove stood a stone basin filled with still water, its surface so smooth it seemed like a mirror polished by the hand of time itself. Olivia paused at the edge of the circle, her breath catching softly. "This is the Whispering Grove," she said, her voice barely above a whisper itself. "It is said that if you listen closely, the trees will tell you stories older than kingdoms." Emma stepped forward first, peering into the basin with wide eyes. "It looks like the sky has fallen into it," she murmured, tracing the edge of the stone with her fingertips. Noah knelt beside her, studying the water with quiet thought. "Perhaps it is not the sky we see, but the silence itself," he mused, his words drifting like soft smoke. Liam stood a little apart, watching his friends with a quiet heart. He could feel something in the grove, an unspoken peace that was neither heavy nor light, but balanced, like the gentle sway of a cradle. He let the silence settle into him, breathing it in as one might breathe the scent of blooming lavender. They lingered there, each in their own way. Olivia hummed a song that wove seamlessly into the forest's rhythm, her voice threading with the sigh of the wind. Emma gathered fallen petals, weaving them into small crowns that she placed upon each of their heads with giggles. Noah, ever the thinker, sat cross-legged at the edge of the basin, watching the play of light and shadow ripple across the water's surface. And Liam, quiet as always, closed his eyes and listened, not to words, but to the language of silence that wrapped around them like a warm cloak. Hours seemed to pass, though time lost its meaning in the grove. The longer they stayed, the more the forest seemed to soften around them. A deer passed at the grove's edge, pausing only for a heartbeat before continuing on. Birds settled in the branches, their songs gentle, unhurried. Even the breeze felt as though it moved with purpose, carrying the scent of pine and earth in a tender embrace. When at last the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose, Olivia rose from where she had been sitting. "We should return before nightfall," she said softly, though her voice held no urgency. It was merely a suggestion, carried like a leaf on still air. Emma protested playfully, wishing to stay a little longer, but Noah stood and offered her his hand. "The grove will still be here tomorrow," he said gently, "and so will its stories." Together, they walked back the way they had come, their steps quieter now, as though they feared to disturb the stillness they carried with them. The forest seemed to bless their passage, shadows deepening, the last threads of sunlight weaving through the leaves like golden embroidery. When they reached the forge once more, night had already wrapped itself around the world. Liam lit the lanterns one by one, their glow spilling softly across the stone walls. Olivia placed a sprig of fern upon the mantle, a token from the grove, while Emma set the petal crowns upon a shelf as though they were treasures. Noah sat once again by the fire, his thoughts deep, but his expression serene. They shared another simple meal, warmed by the crackle of flames and the comfort of each other's presence. No one spoke much, but no one needed to. The silence between them was fuller now, carrying the memory of the Whispering Grove like a song without words. Before sleep, Liam stepped outside. The stars had returned, countless and bright, scattered like seeds across the velvet sky. He breathed deeply, feeling the night settle into him. The sword he was forging still rested unfinished within the forge, but in that moment he felt no rush. The silence was enough. The night was enough. And tomorrow, he thought, they would return again to the grove, where silence spoke more than words ever could. Chapter 8: Lanterns of the River. The morning drifted gently into the village, a veil of pale mist trailing along the rooftops, softening every edge and corner until the world seemed wrapped in silver silk. Liam stirred before the forge fire, the embers faint but steady, their warmth reaching just enough to remind him of their patient strength. He rose slowly, stretching the stiffness from his shoulders, and stepped outside into the hushed dawn. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of dew-soaked earth and distant wildflowers. Beyond the forge, the river meandered like a ribbon of glass, its surface touched by the earliest light of day. Birds stirred in the hedgerows, their calls tentative, as if they, too, hesitated to break the softness of morning. Liam closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, before turning back to the forge where the others were beginning to wake. Noah was already at the workbench, arranging small vials of oil and polished stones in neat rows. His hands moved carefully, as though each gesture carried intention beyond the simple task. Olivia entered next, carrying a bundle of fresh linens, her smile warm and unhurried. Emma trailed behind her, hair still mussed from sleep, clutching a woven basket filled with apples. The simple sight of them filled the forge with the sense of a quiet home. Over their breakfast, bread softened with honey and slices of apple, they spoke of the river. Olivia told them of a tradition that came once every season, when villagers would gather at dusk to set lanterns upon the water. They say the lanterns carry our wishes into the heart of the river, she explained, her voice calm, her hands resting lightly in her lap. The current takes them, and the river keeps them safe. Emma's eyes brightened. "Do you think the river listens?" she asked, voice full of wonder. Noah smiled gently. "Perhaps it listens not with ears, but with silence. And silence can hold more than we ever realize." The thought lingered in the forge like incense smoke, filling each of them with a quiet longing. Liam, though silent, felt something stir within him. He had never placed a wish upon the river before, but the thought of a light drifting away, carried softly by the current, filled him with a strange calm. That evening, when the sun had begun its descent and the sky shimmered in shades of amber and rose, the four of them walked together to the riverbank. The entire village seemed to have gathered there, their voices hushed, their lanterns glowing faintly in the dimming light. Children clutched their parents' hands, their laughter soft, their excitement tempered by the gentle reverence of the moment. The river itself was still waiting, as though it knew what was to come. Its surface reflected the sky above, gold melting into purple, scattered with the first timid stars. Olivia handed each of them a lantern she had prepared earlier, small wooden frames lined with thin paper, glowing with the light of a single candle within. The flame flickered softly, painting their faces in warm gold. "Make a wish," Olivia said simply. Emma closed her eyes, her lips moving in a whisper no one else could hear. She set her lantern upon the water with both hands, watching as it bobbed gently before the current carried it away. Noah followed, lowering his lantern with care, his expression thoughtful, his wish folded deep inside him like a secret. Olivia set hers upon the water last, her eyes shining with quiet peace as she watched it drift. Liam lingered, his lantern warm in his hands. He did not know what words to shape into a wish. He thought of the sword, still incomplete in the forge, and of the silence that filled both his work and his life. At last, he bent low, setting the lantern softly upon the river's skin. He whispered nothing, only a breath, only the weight of his presence. And that was enough. The river accepted their offerings, carrying the lanterns gently downstream, where countless others already floated, their lights shimmering like a constellation born upon water. The sight was quiet magic, an entire galaxy of lanterns drifting together, the reflections rippling softly in the current. The villagers stood in silence, their hearts resting in the glow. As night deepened, the lanterns shone brighter, their golden light mirrored by the stars above. The boundary between sky and water seemed to blur, and for a moment it felt as though they stood in a world woven entirely of light and shadow. Emma leaned against Olivia, her eyes heavy with sleep, while Noah and Liam watched the lanterns drift farther and farther until they became small pinpricks of light, indistinguishable from the stars. On their walk home, the air was cool and fragrant, touched with the scent of river reeds and night-blooming jasmine. The village grew quiet again, lanterns and windows glowing softly like guardians of the night. The four of them walked without haste, their steps in rhythm with the slow pulse of the earth. When they reached the forge, Liam lit a small fire in the hearth. They sat together, not speaking much, each one lost in the memory of the river's glow. Emma, curled up in a blanket, whispered drowsily. It was like the stars came down to meet us. Olivia stroked her hair gently, her smile tender. Perhaps they did. Noah stirred the fire, watching the embers shift. Or perhaps it was only the river teaching us how to see what was always there. Liam said nothing, but in his heart, he knew he would remember the image of the lanterns for as long as he lived. The sword of silence still waited, but now it seemed to carry a new weight, a lightness born not of fire or metal, but of something quieter, something eternal. When they retired to sleep, the forge fell still once more, but the memory of the river's lanterns lingered. Even in dreams, they carried with them the soft glow of wishes drifting away, held forever by the silence of water and the patience of stars. And as Liam drifted into slumber, he thought of the river's current, endless and unbroken, carrying light without losing it. A silence that was not empty, but full. A silence that perhaps could forge more than steel. Chapter 9: The Whispering Hills. The morning rose slow and tender, like a curtain being drawn open by invisible hands. Mist clung to the earth, veiling the hills in silver, while the sun's light seeped gently into the sky, pale gold against the lingering blue of night. The forge was quiet, save for the faint crackle of dying embers and the steady rhythm of Liam's breath as he moved through the motions of his work. But today was not a day of forging. It was a day of walking. Noah had suggested it the night before, his voice thoughtful as he watched the fire. "The sword will wait," he had said softly. But sometimes the silence asks us to listen, not only here, but beyond. Olivia had nodded in agreement, her eyes already drifting toward the hills that curved like a cradle around the village. Emma, of course, had been delighted at the idea of an excursion. And so, with baskets of bread and fruit, they set out together in the early light. The path from the forge wound between fields of tall grass, the stalks heavy with dew that sparkled like shards of glass in the rising sun. Their boots brushed against the wet blades, sending tiny droplets scattering into the air. The world smelled fresh, earth and grass, the faint sweetness of clover, the distant whisper of pine carried from the hills. Emma skipped ahead, her laughter ringing softly through the quiet. Olivia followed at a gentler pace, her basket balanced against her hip. Noah walked alongside Liam, silent but present, his gaze shifting often to the horizon. The four of them moved like a single current, steady and unhurried. The hills grew closer with every step, their slopes draped in a patchwork of heather, moss, and wildflowers. The mist lingered in their folds, trailing upward like smoke from an unseen fire. Birds wheeled lazily overhead, their wings catching the pale light, their calls distant and unintrusive. When they reached the first rise, Emma spun in place, her arms spread wide. "It feels like we've stepped into a dream," she said, her cheeks flushed with delight. Olivia smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "That's what the hills are known for. They're said to keep whispers. Every sound here lingers, long after it's gone." "Whispers?" Emma tilted her head, curious. "Yes," Noah said, his voice low, his eyes fixed on the rolling green around them. "The wind carries them. Some say the hills remember everything. Songs, prayers, wishes left unspoken. If you listen closely enough, you might hear them." Emma pressed a finger to her lips and grew quiet, tilting her head as if to catch some hidden murmur. The others followed her lead, and together they stood still upon the hilltop, listening. At first, there was only the soft breath of the wind, brushing through grass and wildflowers. But then, faint, almost imagined, there was something more, a low hum, like the ghost of a song, carried just at the edge of hearing. Liam felt it settle into him, not as sound, but as presence. The hills were alive, not with noise, but with memory. It was a silence full of voices, gathered across time, too gentle to disturb yet too enduring to vanish. He closed his eyes, letting it sink deeper, until it seemed his very heartbeat fell in rhythm with the quiet song. They walked further into the hills, their steps soft upon moss and stone. At midday, they stopped by a small brook that trickled through the grass, its water clear and cool. Olivia spread a cloth upon the ground, and together they shared their meal. The bread was fresh, the fruit sweet, and the water from the brook crisp enough to wake their senses. Emma dipped her fingers into the stream, laughing at its chill, then cupped her hands to take a sip. After eating, they lay back upon the grass. Clouds drifted above, slow and unhurried, their shadows gliding across the slopes like soft hands brushing the earth. Noah spoke of how the hills had been here long before the village, long before the forge. Olivia told stories of shepherds who claimed the hills guided their flocks with whispers. Emma dreamed aloud of sleeping here beneath the stars, listening until she could hear the whole world speaking. Liam said nothing, but his silence was not empty. He felt the weight of the hills pressing into him, not heavy, but grounding, like a reminder that silence did not mean absence. It meant presence too deep for words. When the sun began its descent, casting the hills in shades of amber and violet, they rose again and continued their walk. The air cooled, the scent of heather and moss growing richer. The whispers seemed clearer now, as if dusk coaxed them closer. A faint melody lingered in the air, weaving through the rustle of grass. At the crest of one last hill, they stopped. Before them stretched the entire valley, the village nestled in its heart, the forge smoke rising in a thin, steady ribbon. Beyond, the river shimmered, catching the light of the fading sun. And above it all, the first stars blinked awake in the deepening sky. Olivia folded her hands, her voice a soft murmur. The hills are singing tonight. Noah nodded, his gaze distant. They always sing. We're just quiet enough now to hear them. Emma leaned against Liam, her eyes wide, reflecting the starlight. Do you think the sword will carry the hills song? Liam looked down at her, then back at the valley glowing beneath the twilight. He did not answer aloud, but in his heart he knew. The silence he forged into steel would not be empty. It would be the silence of the hills, the silence that remembered, the silence that sang. As they descended back toward the village, the stars grew brighter, their light joining the whispers of the hills. By the time they reached the forge once more, the night had fully taken hold. They lit a small fire, its crackle soft, its glow gentle, and sat together in comfortable quiet. Outside, the hills continued to hum, their voices carried endlessly by the wind. Inside, the forge held its own silence, warm, steady, waiting. Liam closed his eyes, feeling both silences merge into one. And in that stillness, there was no emptiness, no loneliness, only presence, only peace. Chapter 10, The Sword of Silence. Night had settled across the valley, steady and deep. Stars filled the sky like scattered embers from an unseen fire, each one patient, each one glowing with a quiet that seemed eternal. The forge at the edge of the village was lit only by the dim pulse of coals, their glow fading and flaring like the last breaths of a lullaby. Inside, Liam sat before the anvil, his hands resting on his knees. Across the anvil lay the sword, complete at last. It shone not with brilliance, but with a muted sheen, as though it had caught the stillness of the hills and folded it into steel. No ornament decorated its blade, no jewels glittered in its hilt, yet it radiated something far more enduring, a calm, like the hush of the world before dawn. Noah stood near the wall, his eyes reflecting the fading glow of the coals. "It doesn't shout of its making," he murmured. "It doesn't ask to be seen. And yet," he exhaled, "it holds more than any weapon I've known." Olivia stepped closer and touched the blade lightly, as though afraid to disturb it. "It feels like the brook," she whispered, "like the quiet between songs." Emma, cross-legged on the floor, tilted her head. "It isn't meant for battle, is it?" Liam shook his head. His voice was soft, steady. "No, it was never meant for that. It's a reminder, a vessel for the silence that shapes all things." The forge seemed to echo his words, the coals sighing as they dimmed. Outside, crickets kept their rhythm. The brook murmured as always, and the wind moved slowly through the trees. The world itself seemed to pause, listening. They let the hush deepen, filling the room like water filling a vessel. At last, Olivia spoke again. "What will you do with it?" Liam studied the blade, his faint reflection caught upon it. "I'll keep it," he said. "Not to wield, not to display, but to remember. The silence it carries belongs here, in this valley, in us." Emma leaned against the anvil, her eyes heavy. "Then it will always sing to us," she whispered, half asleep already. And indeed, the sword seemed to sing, though not with sound. Its presence filled the forge like a low hum, barely felt yet undeniable. The silence was no longer empty. It was whole, alive, holding everything gently within it. Noah stirred the embers once more, coaxing a final flare of warmth. "Then let it rest," he said. "Let it remain as part of the forge, part of this valley." Together they lifted the blade and set it upon a stand by the hearth. Firelight touched it, but the sword did not gleam like ordinary steel. Instead, it glowed faintly, like twilight folded into form. For a time, they stayed in the forge. Olivia hummed a quiet tune. Emma drifted into sleep with her head on her arms. Noah leaned against the wall with his eyes half closed. Liam watched the sword, but more than that, listened. It carried the hills, the brook, the lanterns of the village, and the voices of those who had walked beside him. It carried every silence he had ever known, every pause that gave shape to sound. In its quiet, he felt balance. Not absence, but life in its gentlest form. When the fire sank low, they prepared for rest. Liam lingered at the door, stepping outside into the cool night. Stars stretched vast above him, and the hills whispered softly in the dark. He breathed in the stillness, eyes closed, letting it settle deep within him. When he turned back, the forge glowed faintly behind him, windows warm like small watchful stars. Inside, the sword rested by the hearth, its silence folding around the forge like a blanket. Liam lay down at last, letting the hush carry him. His breath slowed, his body eased, his mind released the day. The forge's silence, the hill's whispers, the sword's presence, all blended into a single, gentle hush. It was not an ending, but a circle unbroken. Silence had been forged into steel, but it also lived in every breath, every pause, every moment shared. And as long as they remembered, the silence would remain. The night deepened. Stars wheeled slowly overhead. The village slept, safe in the valley's arms. And Liam, drifting into sleep, felt only peace, vast, endless, complete. The silence sang, and the world listened.